If the family you had quietly poured $450,000 into to save from bankruptcy told you not to come to Christmas because your brother was in charge, what would you do? Most people would cry, beg, or argue. I just said 2 words. Okay, noted. That was the night my parents realized the daughter they treated as a walking emergency wallet was actually the one holding the title to their house, and Christmas was just the first thing they were about to lose. My name is Veronica Phelps. I am 32 years old, and I live my life in the quiet margins of other people's disasters. The office was silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the industrial HVAC system pushing recycled heat through the vents. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the 30th floor, Denver was a grid of amber and white lights, blurred slightly by a late December snowstorm that had been picking up momentum since rush hour. Most of the city was asleep, or at least at home, wrapped in blankets and watching holiday movies. I was here, bathed in the blue light of dual monitors, dissecting a complex embezzlement scheme involving a mid-sized construction firm in Boulder. I am a forensic accountant. To most people, that sounds like the driest profession on earth. They imagine me surrounded by dusty ledgers and calculators, wearing a visor and drowning in boredom. They are wrong. My job is not about math. My job is about truth. Numbers do not have egos. Numbers do not have agendas. Numbers do not lie to protect their favorite children. When a company bleeds, I am the one they call to find the wound. I track every cent, every hidden transaction, every shell company designed to siphon value from the whole. I am precise, I am invisible, and I am very, very good at what I do. It was 11 at night. I had been staring at a spreadsheet for 6 hours, tracking a discrepancy of $2 million, when my phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk. The sound was jarring in the absolute stillness of the empty office. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. My colleagues knew better than to text at this hour unless the building was on fire. My few friends knew I was in the middle of a closing cycle. That left only one category of human being who would demand my attention with zero regard for my time. I looked down. The message was from Mom. Call me, now, important. My stomach tightened. A reflex honed over 3 decades of conditioning. That specific phrasing never meant they wanted to hear my voice. It never meant there was a medical emergency, because if there were, they would have called 911 first. No, that message meant there was a problem that required a solution, and in the Phelps family, I was the solution. The problem, inevitably, would be money, or it would be Logan. Usually, it was both. I exhaled a long breath, watching it fog slightly in the chilled air of the office. I saved my work, closed the spreadsheet, and pulled my headset off. I did not want to have this conversation, but ignoring it would only lead to a barrage of follow-up texts, each more frantic and guilt-laden than the last. It was better to rip the bandage off. I swiped the screen and dialed. Elaine Phelps answered on the first ring. There was no hello. There was no pleasantry. "Veronica," she said. Her voice was breathless, but not with panic. It was the tone she used when she was trying to sound authoritative, the tone of a woman who had rehearsed what she was about to say, because she knew, on some level, that it was indefensible. "I am here." "Mom," I said, leaning back in my ergonomic chair and staring out at the falling snow. "Is everyone okay?" "We finally went through the paperwork," she said. I blinked. I did not speak. I knew exactly what paperwork she was referring to, but I had not expected them to actually read it. For years, my parents had treated financial documents like radioactive waste. They ignored them until the Geiger counter started screaming, and then they handed them to me to dispose of. "What paperwork?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "The settlement documents for the house," she said. "Your father and I were looking at the final breakdown from the bank. We saw the total. Veronica, we saw exactly how much went into clearing the arrears and the penalties." I waited. I spun a pen between my fingers. $450,000, she said, emphasizing each word. "That is what you paid." It was actually closer to $448,000.62, but I did not correct her. I had liquidated my entire stock portfolio, drained my savings, and borrowed against my 401k to stop the foreclosure auction. I had done it because they had called me weeping at 3 in the morning, terrifying me with visions of them being homeless in their 60s. I had done it because, despite everything, the house in Pueblo was the only home I had ever known. I helped you out. I said simply, "We talked about this. I told you handled it." "We know," she said, "and we appreciate it. Veronica, we really do. It is just that—" She trailed off. This was the pivot. This was the moment the gratitude would curdle into something else. I braced myself. "Just what?" I asked. Mark Phelps's voice boomed through the speakerphone. He must have been sitting right next to her at the kitchen table. "It is Logan," my father said. His voice was firm, deeper than Mom's, carrying the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "What about Logan?" I asked. My hand stopped spinning the pen. I set it down on the desk with a soft click. "He is having a hard time with this," Dad said. "He feels terrible about the situation. You know how proud your brother is. He feels like he failed us, and seeing you step in like this, it is humiliating for him. He is the oldest. He feels he should have been the one to fix it." I almost laughed. Logan had been the one to convince them to refinance the house 3 times to fund his failed business ventures. Logan was the reason there was a debt to fix in the first place. But I said nothing. I let them talk. "We are trying to rebuild his confidence." Mom jumped back in, her voice softening, pleading for me to understand the fragile ecosystem of my brother's ego. "He wants to take charge of the family affairs again. He wants to host Christmas this year. He wants to prove he can provide a good holiday for us." "That sounds nice," I said, though the ice in my stomach was spreading. "I am happy he wants to contribute. I can bring the sides, or I can just come for dinner if he wants to handle the main course." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, thick silence that stretched across the miles between Denver and Pueblo. "Veronica," Dad said, clearing his throat, "that is the thing. Logan does not think it is a good idea for you to be there." I sat up straight. The leather of my chair creaked. "Excuse me?" I said. "He is just very uncomfortable right now," Mom said quickly. "Every time he looks at you, he gets reminded of the debt. He gets reminded that his little sister had to bail out the family. It makes him feel small, honey, and we cannot have that tension at Christmas. It is supposed to be a happy time." "So," I said, measuring my words with the precision I used for my forensic audits, "let me understand this correctly. You are uninviting me to Christmas?" "We are not uninviting you," Dad said, sounding annoyed that I was stripping away the euphemisms. "We are just asking you to sit this one out. For the family, for peace." "You are asking me to stay away," I repeated, "because Logan feels bad. He needs this. Veronica," Mom said, "he needs to feel like the man of the house. If you are there, sitting there with your expensive clothes and your big city job, knowing what you paid, it just ruins the dynamic. He said he cannot relax. He said he feels like you are judging him." I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, a pale woman with tired eyes and a suit that cost more than my brother's car. They saw the suit. They did not see the 80-hour weeks. They did not see the years of missed vacations. They certainly did not see the emptiness. "I paid off the mortgage," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was hard. "I cleared nearly $500,000 of debt so you two would not be sleeping in a motel next week. And because of that, because I saved you, I am not allowed to eat Christmas dinner with you?" "Don't make this transactional," Dad snapped. "That is your problem. Veronica, you always make everything about numbers. This is about feelings. This is about family unity." "Family unity," I echoed. "Look," Mom said, her voice soothing again, "we will do something separate. Maybe come down in January. Once Logan has had his moment, once he feels secure again, we just need to give him this win. You understand, right? You are the strong one. You can handle being alone. Logan, he needs us right now." I closed my eyes. The sentence hung in the air, familiar and rotting. "You are the strong one. It was not a compliment. It was a justification. It was the excuse they had used my entire life to neglect me while they poured all their emotional and financial resources into the black hole that was my brother, because I could survive without them. They assumed I did not need them. They were protecting the arsonist from the firefighter because the firefighter's presence made the arsonist feel guilty about the ashes. "Is that your final decision?" I asked. "It is not a decision. It is just a request," Dad said. "But yes, Logan is in charge of Christmas. We are respecting his wishes." I waited for the hurt to come. I waited for the stinging tears that usually accompanied these rejections, the urge to argue, to list all the things I had done, to beg them to see me. I waited to feel that desperate, childish need for their approval. But it did not come. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. It felt like the moment in an audit when the numbers finally align, when the discrepancy is located and the fraud is exposed. There is no emotion in that moment. There is only facts. The fact was, they had chosen. They had chosen him. They would always choose him. No amount of money, no amount of sacrifice, no amount of being the good daughter would ever change the fundamental architecture of this family. I looked at the snow swirling violently outside. "Okay," I said. There was a pause. They had been bracing for a fight. They had prepared their defenses, their guilt trips, their rationalizations. They did not know what to do with surrender. "Okay?" Mom asked, sounding suspicious. "Okay," I said again. Noted. "Just like that?" Dad asked. "You are not going to make a scene?" "I heard what you said," I replied. "Logan is in charge. You want me to stay away so he can feel like the man of the house. I understand completely." "Well," Mom let out a long breath of relief. "Good. I am glad you are being mature about this. Veronica, I knew you would understand. You are always so practical." "I will send your gifts down by mail." I said, "Have a wonderful Christmas." "You too." "Honey," Mom said, her voice bright and cheerful now that the unpleasantness was resolved. "We love you. Call us next week." "We love you." The words felt like ash in my mouth. "Goodbye," I said. I ended the call before they could say anything else. I placed the phone face down on the desk. The silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It was not the peaceful silence of concentration. It was the heavy final silence of a bridge collapsing into the sea. I sat there for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe 20. I watched the city lights. I watched the snow. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, like a knot unraveling. It was not relief, exactly. It was the absence of hope. I had spent 32 years hoping that if I was just good enough, successful enough, helpful enough, they would finally look at me with the same adoration they gave Logan. I had thought $450,000 was the price of admission to their love. I was wrong. It was just the price of admission to their utilization. I stood up. My legs felt stiff. I packed my laptop into my bag. I put on my wool coat and wrapped my scarf around my neck. I walked out of the office, the click of my heels echoing in the empty hallway. I rode the elevator down to the parking garage alone. The air in the garage was freezing, biting at my exposed cheeks. My breath plumed in front of me as I walked toward my sedan. My footsteps were the only sound in the concrete cavern. I reached my car and unlocked it, but I did not get in immediately. I stood there, gripping the cold door handle. My parents thought they had just navigated a tricky social situation. They thought they had successfully managed their daughter and protected their son. They thought everything was going to go back to normal. They thought the house was safe. They thought they were living in a house they owned, a house I had simply paid the mortgage on. They were wrong. A small, dark smile touched my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a forensic accountant who has found the smoking gun. When I had transferred the funds to save the house, I had not done it as a personal gift. I had not written a check from Veronica Phelps to Mark and Elaine Phelps. I had structured it as a distressed asset acquisition. I had created a limited liability company, a separate legal entity designed solely to hold the property. The deed to the house in Pueblo was not in their names anymore. It was held by Blake Harbor LLC, and I was the sole managing member of Blake Harbor LLC. They had just uninvited their landlord from Christmas. Noted. I whispered to the empty garage. The word hung in the cold air, sharp and dangerous. It was no longer an acceptance, it was a receipt. I opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not cry on the drive home. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, and for the first time in my life, I did not wonder what I could do to fix things for them. I only wondered how long it would take for them to realize that when you bite the hand that feeds you, you should probably check who holds the leash first. The drive home from the office that night was a blur of highway lights and falling snow, but my mind was miles away. It was drifting back down Interstate 25, past the sprawling suburbs of Denver, past the rolling hills of Castle Rock, all the way down to the dusty, sun-baked streets of Pueblo. I grew up in a house that always looked like it was holding its breath, waiting for a disaster that had already arrived. It was a single-story ranch-style home with beige siding that had peeled to reveal the gray primer underneath, like a sunburn that refused to heal. We had a swamp cooler on the roof that rattled like a dying engine every time the temperature climbed above 80 degrees, which in Pueblo was most of the summer. The gutters on the north side leaked, creating a perpetual patch of mud where nothing would grow, and the backyard was a graveyard of rusted bicycle parts and dried tumbleweeds that my father promised every spring he would clear out. He never did. Inside that house, there were two distinct gravitational pulls. There was the universe of Logan, and there was the universe of Veronica. Logan, 2 years older than me, was the son. He was loud, charismatic, and constantly in motion. He was the future of the Phelps family, the one destined to break the cycle of mediocrity. My parents looked at him and saw potential that needed to be nurtured, protected, and funded. Then there was me. I was the moon, reflecting whatever light was left over. Silent and orbital, I was the easy one, the tough one, the one who did not need new shoes because I did not complain about the blisters. My education in forensic accounting did not begin in a university lecture hall. It began at our chipped laminate kitchen table when I was 8 years old. I remember a Saturday morning in July. The house was stifling hot because the swamp cooler belt had snapped again. Logan was in the living room, sprawled on the carpet, playing a video game on a console my parents had bought him for getting a B- in history. The electronic beeps and synthesized explosions drifted into the kitchen where I sat with Mom. She placed a shoebox in front of me. It smelled of receipts and old rubber bands. "You are so good with numbers." "Ronnie," she said, smoothing my hair. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with the red exhaustion of a double shift at the diner. "Help Mommy organize this, okay? Put the electric bills in one pile and the water bills in another, and add them up on the calculator." I felt a swell of pride. I was being useful. I was being trusted. While Logan was conquering digital worlds, I was being invited into the adult world. I sorted the papers with reverence. I smoothed out the crinkled edges of the overdue notices, lining them up until the corners met perfectly. I punched the numbers into the oversized gray calculator, watching the total climb. $100, $200, $350. I did not know then that I was looking at the anatomy of their failure. I just knew that if I did this job perfectly, Mom would smile at me and say I was her little helper. I learned early that love in our house was not a given right. It was a wage earned through administrative labor. By the time I reached middle school, the dynamic had calcified into something harder. I was 12 years old, and I knew the exact day the electricity would be cut off if the check was not mailed. I knew that the grace period on the credit card was 21 days. I became the household alarm clock. "Dad," I would say, catching him before he left for his job at the warehouse, "the gas bill is due on Tuesday." He would sigh, rubbing the back of his neck, looking at me not as a daughter, but as a reminder of his obligations. "I know. Veronica, I am handling it. Stop nagging." But he was not handling it, so I started handling it for him. I remember sitting at the table with the weekly grocery budget, Mom had left $40 on the counter for the week. I knew Logan had a travel baseball tournament coming up in Colorado Springs. The team fees were paid, but he needed money for lunch and Gatorade, or he would feel left out. He would be embarrassed. I looked at the grocery list: roast beef, fresh apples, brand-name cereal. I took a pen and crossed them out. I replaced them: hamburger meat, canned peaches, generic oats. I saved $12. I put the cash in an envelope and wrote Logan's baseball on it. When I gave it to Mom later, she did not ask how I had done it. She just kissed my forehead and said, "Thank God." He really wanted to go. We ate flavorless oats for a week. Logan came back with a plastic trophy and a story about a home run. I listened, eating my generic cereal, feeling a strange, hollow satisfaction. I had bought that home run. I had bought his smile. And nobody even knew. The defining moment, the one that seared this role into my soul, happened when I was 14. It was late, past midnight. I had gotten up to get a glass of water. The hallway was dark, but light spilled from the crack under the kitchen door. My parents were arguing. It was the hushed, frantic arguing of people who are trying not to wake the children, unaware that one of the children was standing in the shadows, holding her breath. "We cannot afford the pitching camp." "Mark," Mom hissed, "we are already 2 months behind on the visa." "He has to go." "Elaine," Dad whispered back, his voice desperate. "The scout from the junior college is going to be there. This is his shot. If he gets a scholarship, everything changes. We cannot let Logan fall behind just because we are tight right now." "But what about Veronica?" Mom asked. "She needs braces. The dentist said her bite is getting worse." I froze. My hand went to my mouth. I had been hiding my smile for months because of my crooked teeth. There was a silence. I leaned closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Veronica is fine," Dad said. "But her teeth," Mom said weakly. "She is tough," Dad said. "She is not like him. Elaine, she does not need the confidence boost. She is strong, she can take care of herself. We will fix her teeth later. Right now, we have to invest in Logan. She can take care of herself." It sounded like a compliment. It was spoken with the cadence of praise. But standing there in the dark, barefoot on the cold linoleum, I understood what it really was. It was a permission slip. They were giving themselves permission to neglect me because I was resilient enough to survive it. My strength was not a virtue they admired. It was a convenience they exploited. I went back to bed without the water. I lay staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster with my eyes. I decided then that I would never ask them for braces again. I would not ask them for anything. If being strong was my role, I would be unbreakable. A year later, when I was 15, the mail arrived while I was home alone. There was an envelope from a credit card company addressed to Veronica Phelps. It looked official. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. It was a statement. I stared at the paper, my brain trying to make sense of the data. It showed a balance of $3,000. The transactions were local: tires for the truck, a new television, a cash advance. I did not have a credit card. I was 15. I could not legally sign a contract. I waited for them to come home. I sat at the kitchen table, the statement placed squarely in the center, like a centerpiece of accusations. When Mom walked in and saw it, she did not look shocked. She looked guilty. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Oh," she said, her voice trembling. "You opened that." "What is this?" I asked. My voice was calm. It was terrifyingly calm. "Honey, listen," she started, rushing over to sit across from me. "We were in a bind. The transmission on Dad's truck died, and he needed it for work. And we had maxed out everything else. We just used your social security number this one time. We are going to pay it off. We promise." Identity theft, that was the legal term. Fraud. But in that kitchen, looking at my mother's pleading eyes, it was framed as survival. "You used my name," I said. "We did it for the family," she pleaded. "We did not want to worry you. We handled it." "You did not handle it," I said, pointing at the balance. You buried it under my name. Don't be angry. Ronnie, she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. Please, it is just a number. We will fix it before you are 18. It will not affect you. Just keep this between us, okay? Dad feels terrible enough as it is. I looked at the statement. $3,000. I looked at my mother. I realized then that I was not their child. I was their escape hatch. I was their rainy day fund. I did not call the police. I did not report the fraud. I swallowed it. I took the statement, folded it into a perfect square, and nodded. Okay, I said, pay it off. They did not pay it off. It took me 3 years of working at a Dairy Queen to pay it off myself, dollar by dollar, before I turned 18, just so my credit score would not be ruined before I even started my life. Meanwhile, Logan floated above the wreckage. When he turned 16, my parents bought him a used pickup truck. It was not new, but it was solid. He needs it for his image, Dad explained to me as I walked to the bus stop. He cannot be asking girls on dates riding a bicycle. He needs to feel like a man. I walked to the bus stop in the snow. Logan drove past me, honking and waving, the heater blasting in his cabin. I waved back. I was the strong one. I liked walking. That is what I told myself. My senior year, I won the Regional Mathematics Scholarship. It was a prestigious award, covering a significant portion of my tuition for the first year at Colorado State. I came home with the certificate, a heavy piece of parchment with gold foil embossing. Look, I said, placing it on the table where I used to sort bills. Dad looked up from the newspaper. Mom looked up from the stove. That is wonderful, honey, Mom said. She wiped her hands on her apron and hugged me. It was a quick hug. Distracted. We always knew you were the smart one. That is great. Veronica, Dad said. Hey, since you are good with that math stuff, can you look at this letter from the bank? They are talking about an adjustable rate adjustment, and I cannot make heads or tails of the percentages. The glow of my achievement lasted exactly 11 seconds. 11 seconds of celebration before I was put back to work. Sure. Dad, I said. I felt the familiar weight settling on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating like a lead blanket. Let me see it. That night, I started the notebook. It was a simple spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover. I hid it under my mattress, between the box spring and the frame. On the first page, I wrote the title in black ink, pressing down hard enough to indent the paper. Things no one remembers I did. I started listing them. October 14th, 1999. Saved $12 on groceries for Logan's baseball. November 3rd, 2001. Paid the water bill with babysitting money. $42. June, 2003. Paid off the credit card opened in my name. $3,100 including interest. August, 2004. Translated the bank loan terms for Dad so he did not sign a predatory agreement. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote down every hour of labor, every dollar stolen or borrowed, every moment of emotional maintenance I had performed to keep the SS Phelps from sinking. I did not know why I was writing it. I was not planning to show it to them. It was not a manifesto. It was an anchor. I needed to write it down to prove to myself that it was real, because they were so good at gaslighting me, so good at rewriting history where they were the heroes doing their best, and I was just the easy child who required nothing, that I was afraid I would forget. I was afraid I would start believing their version of the story. I lay in bed that night, the notebook safe beneath me. Through the thin drywall, I could hear Logan in the next room. He was snoring. It was a deep, rhythmic, peaceful sound. It was the sound of someone who has never had to worry about the lights turning off. It was the sound of someone who has never had to check a credit report at age 15. It was the sound of someone who believes the world is safe because someone else is holding the roof up. I stared at the dark ceiling. Is this it? I whispered to the empty room. Is this my entire purpose? To be the foundation so he can be the skyscraper? I listened to the house settling, the groan of the timbers, the drip of the leaky faucet in the bathroom. I knew I should be angry. I knew I should scream, but all I felt was tired. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, dreaming of numbers, of columns that balanced, of a ledger where for once the credit column belonged to me. I did not know then that the notebook under my mattress was the first draft of a weapon that would one day bring the whole house down. All I knew was that I was the strong one, and strong girls do not cry. They just keep counting. I left home for Colorado State University with a full trunk, a scholarship that covered 80% of my tuition, and a handshake from my father that felt more like a dismissal than a goodbye. My parents loved to tell the neighbors about my independence. At barbecues and church potlucks, Mom would beam, clutching her iced tea, and say that Veronica was so self-sufficient they barely had to worry about her. They made my solitude sound like a virtue they had instilled, rather than a necessity they had enforced. While I was in Fort Collins working 2 jobs, one shelving books in the dusty silence of the library basement at 6 in the morning, and the other steaming milk at a coffee shop until closing, Logan was starting his life at a private business school in Scottsdale. The tuition difference was astronomical. My parents could not afford it. I knew their finances better than they did, and I knew the math did not work. But they were convinced that Logan needed the right network. They said he was going to be a CEO, a shaker, a mover. You have to spend money to make money, Dad would say, repeating the mantra like a prayer while he signed the papers for a second mortgage on the house I had grown up in. They bought him a new wardrobe because he had to look the part. They paid for his fraternity dues because that was where the connections were made. They funded trip after trip to networking conferences in Las Vegas and Los Angeles, which looked suspiciously like vacations in the photos Logan posted online. I remember scrolling through those photos on my break at the library, smelling like old paper and cheap sanitizer. There was Logan, tan and smiling, holding a cocktail on a golf course. There was Logan in a tailored suit, laughing with a group of guys who all looked exactly like him. I looked down at my own shoes, which were starting to separate at the sole. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from the supply closet and fixed them. I did not ask for money for new shoes. I knew there was none left. The first emergency call came during the winter of my sophomore year. It was finals week. I had not slept in 24 hours, fueled by black coffee and the terror of losing my GPA, which was the only thing keeping my scholarship alive. My phone rang. It was Mom. I answered, expecting bad news about a relative or maybe a wish of good luck for my exams. "Veronica," she sobbed. Her voice was jagged, broken by hyperventilating gasps. My heart stopped. I thought someone had died. I dropped my pen. "Mom? What happened? Is Dad okay?" "It is the bank," she choked out. "They are going to bounce the checks. Ronnie, all of them. The mortgage, the electric, the car payment. We miscalculated the deposit dates." I sat back in my library chair, the adrenaline of fear curdling into exhaustion. It was not a death. It was just math. It was always just math. "How much?" I asked. "We are overdrawn by $600, she said. "Plus the fees? They are charging us $35 for every transaction. It is snowballing. Honey, if the mortgage check bounces, the rate goes up. We cannot handle a rate hike." I closed my eyes. I had $800 in my checking account. It was everything I had saved from 3 months of barista tips. It was meant for my textbooks for the spring semester, and my share of the rent for the off-campus house I shared with 4 other girls. "Can you help us?" she asked. "Just for a few days. Dad gets paid on Friday. We will wire it back the second the direct deposit hits. I promise. Please, Ronnie, I do not know who else to call." She did not call Logan. Logan was in Scottsdale. Logan was the investment. I was the insurance policy. I walked to the bank branch on campus during my lunch break. The wind was cutting through my thin coat. I filled out the transfer slip. $650. I left myself with barely enough to buy ramen for the rest of the month. I sent the money. Friday came and went. The money did not come back. When I called a week later to ask about it, Dad answered. He sounded cheerful, oblivious. "Oh, hey kiddo. Yeah, about that. We had to replace the water heater. Total disaster. We will get you back next month, okay? You are doing okay, right? You are working so much. I bet you are flush." I did not scream. I did not demand my money. I just said, "Okay, Dad, no problem." That night, I opened my laptop. I did not pull out the old spiral notebook from under my bed. I had left that in Pueblo. I opened a new Excel spreadsheet. I typed in the date. I typed in the amount. $650. Under the status column, I typed pending. By the time I graduated, the spreadsheet had grown. It was no longer just a list. It was a dossier. There was the time Dad got a speeding ticket in a school zone and could not pay the fine without losing his license. $200. There was the time Mom needed emergency dental work because she had skipped her checkups for 5 years. $400. There was the time they maxed out their credit card, buying Logan a high-end laptop for his graduation, a graduation that took him 5 years to achieve, and could not buy groceries. $150. Every time. The request was framed as a loan. Every time. The repayment was forgotten. Swallowed by the amnesia of entitlement, I stopped asking for it back. I just recorded it. It became a grim ritual. They took, and I wrote it down. After graduation, I moved to Denver. I landed a job at Northline Analytics Group as a junior risk analyst. It was not a glamorous job. It involved staring at data sets for 10 hours a day, looking for anomalies, for rot within corporate structures, but it paid a salary, a real consistent salary. I got an apartment. It was small, a studio with a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. I bought my own furniture. I paid my own bills. For the first time in my life, I felt the intoxicating lightness of financial stability. I thought I had escaped. I was wrong. To my parents, my employment at Northline was not my liberation. It was their line of credit expansion. They seemed to have a sixth sense for when my direct deposit hit. The calls would start on the 2nd and 16th of every month. "Logan's business is really taking off," Mom would say. "He just needs a bridge loan to cover the inventory before the big orders come in." Logan's businesses were always taking off, yet they never seemed to fly. There was a custom t-shirt company, a mobile app for dog walkers, a consultancy firm that had no clear definition of what it consulted on. My parents poured everything they had into these ventures. They treated him like a tech unicorn about to go public, terrified that if they stopped funding him, they would kill the dream. But when their pockets were empty, they turned to me. Don't make him feel pressured. Dad told me once when I asked why Logan could not just get a job while he built his business, "He is a visionary. Veronica, he cannot be bogged down with a 9 to 5. It kills creativity. You are different. You are good at the grind. You are steady." Steady, that was their word for me. Steady meant boring. Steady meant safe. Steady meant I could be bled without dying. The requests morphed from emergencies to maintenance. They needed help with the car insurance. They needed help with the property tax. They promised it was temporary, just until Logan's big break happened. The breaking point of that era, the moment that hardened my heart from a bruise into a callus, happened 2 years into my career. I had been eyeing a promotion at Northline. My manager told me I was sharp, but I lacked a specific certification in advanced data forensics. There was a fast-track course available. It cost $2,500. It was a lot of money. I had been saving for 6 months, putting aside $50 here, $100 there, skipping happy hours, bringing my lunch to work every single day. I finally had the full amount sitting in my savings account. I filled out the registration form on my screen. My finger was hovering over the submit button. I was smiling. I could see my future opening up, a ladder climbing out of the mediocrity I had been born into. My cell phone rang. It was Mom. She was screaming, "Veronica, you have to help. They are taking it." "Taking what?" I asked, my hand freezing on the mouse. "The truck. Logan's truck. The repo man is in the driveway right now. He is hooking it up." I closed my eyes. Logan's truck, the symbol of his manhood, the vehicle he needed to drive to meetings that usually took place at sports bars. "Let them take it." "Mom," I said, "if he cannot make the payments, he cannot afford the truck." "You do not understand," she wailed. He has a pitch meeting tomorrow with an investor in Boulder. If he does not show up, or if he shows up in an Uber, he looks like a failure. This is his big chance. Ronnie, if this deal goes through, he pays us all back, everything." She was crying so hard she was choking. Dad was in the background, yelling at the tow truck driver to wait. "How much to get the driver to drop it?" I asked. My voice sounded dead to my own ears. $2,400, she said. "That covers the 3 missed payments and the repo fee. Please, baby, please, we do not have it. We are tapped out. If he loses this truck, he loses his confidence. You know how he gets. He will spiral." I looked at the registration form on my screen. $2,500. I looked at the future I had saved for. And then I heard my mother's voice, the voice that had programmed me since birth. "He is the future. You are the safety net. You are the strong one." If I said no, I would be the villain. I would be the reason Logan failed. I would be the reason Mom cried. I would be the selfish sister who let her brother be humiliated in the driveway. "I hate you," I thought, not at them, but at the situation, at the trap. "Put the driver on the phone," I said. I gave the repo man my debit card number. I authorized the charge. $2,400. I watched my savings account balance drop to double digits. I clicked cancel on the registration form for the certification course. When Mom came back on the line, she was weeping with relief. "You are an angel, Ronnie, an angel. We will pay you back as soon as the investor check clears. I promise." I hung up. I went to the office bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I did not cry. I stood there and stared at the grout lines in the tile floor, breathing in the smell of industrial air freshener. I felt a piece of ambition die inside me, replaced by a cold, heavy resentment. That afternoon, I went back to my desk, to my colleagues. I was Veronica Phelps, the calm, efficient analyst who could find a needle in a haystack of financial data. I sat in meetings and discussed risk mitigation strategies for Fortune 500 companies. I projected absolute competence. But on my lunch break, I sat in the stairwell, eating a sandwich I had made at home, arguing with my parents' homeowner's insurance provider because they had let their policy lapse again. I was living a double life. In one, I was a respected professional. In the other, I was the unpaid administrative assistant and financier for 2 adults who refused to grow up and 1 adult who refused to work. I kept updating the spreadsheet. It was no longer just a list of transactions. I added columns for interest. I calculated what that money would have been worth if I had invested it in an index fund instead of the Bank of Logan. The number was growing terrifyingly large. It was enough for a down payment on a condo. It was enough for a master's degree. I told myself that good daughters do not count coins. I told myself that family is about sacrifice. But the accountant in me knew better. Sacrifice is giving up something for a greater good. This was not sacrifice. This was a subsidy for dysfunction. One night, late in November, I was alone in the office. The cleaning crew had already come through, leaving the vacuum tracks in the carpet. I was testing a new risk assessment model we had developed for a client in the lending sector. It was an algorithm designed to predict the likelihood of a borrower defaulting on a loan based on their behavioral patterns, income instability, and debt-to-income ratio. I stared at the empty fields on the screen. On a whim, a dark, masochistic whim, I decided to test it. I did not input the client's data. I entered the financial data of the Phelps family. I entered Logan's inconsistent income. I entered my parents' debt load. I entered their credit scores, which I knew by heart because I monitored them. I entered the frequency of their emergency requests. I entered their repayment history, which was non-existent. I hit Run Analysis. The software crunched the numbers for a few seconds. The loading bar spun. Then, the result flashed on the screen in a bright, aggressive red box. Critical risk, probability of default, 99%. Recommendation: do not extend credit. Initiate immediate recovery actions. I stared at the red box. The machine saw what I refused to see. The machine had no guilt. It had no childhood memories. It just looked at the facts and told the truth. My family was a bad investment. They were a financial black hole. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded too loud in the empty office. I closed the program. I deleted the data history. I turned off the monitor. I packed my bag and went home, knowing that the phone would ring again soon, and knowing that, despite the warning in bright red letters, I would probably pick it up. But the seed had been planted, the algorithm had spoken, and deep down, I knew that eventually, the analyst in me would have to override the daughter. I just did not know that the final audit was coming so soon. The call that ended my financial freedom did not come in the middle of the night. It came on a Tuesday evening, just after 7 o'clock. I had been working at Northline for 5 years by then. I was a senior associate. I had my own office with a door that closed, a view of the Rockies, and a salary that allowed me to max out my retirement contributions every single month. I had a portfolio. I had a plan. I was 30 years old, and I was finally building a fortress of solvency around myself that I thought was impenetrable. I walked out of the building, wrapping my coat tight against the biting wind. My phone had been on silent during a client debrief. When I pulled it out of my bag in the parking garage, the screen was lit up with 12 missed calls. All from Mom. I listened to the voicemail. It was short. It was not the usual frantic rambling. It was a whisper, terrifying in its resignation. "It is the house, Veronica. They are taking the house. I do not know what to do." I did not go home to my apartment. I did not change out of my blazer and heels. I got into my car and drove south. The drive to Pueblo usually took 2 hours. That night, a mix of freezing rain and sleet turned the interstate into a slushy gray river. I drove with my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, listening to the slap of the wipers and the roar of semi-trucks spraying mud onto my windshield. I ran the numbers in my head as I drove. I knew the market value of their home. I knew what the mortgage balance should have been, theoretically, if they had been paying it, but I also knew my parents, and I knew that theoretical math had no place in the Phelps household. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked dark. The porch light was burned out. The front lawn was overgrown, the dead grass matting down under the sleet. It looked like a place that had already given up. I pushed open the front door. The smell hit me first. Stale coffee, dust, and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. They were in the kitchen. It was always the kitchen. The table was buried under a blizzard of paper, envelopes with red stamps, legal notices, certified mail receipts. Mom was sitting at the head of the table, her face buried in her hands. Dad was staring at the wall, looking 20 years older than he had the last time I saw him, and Logan was pacing back and forth in front of the refrigerator, wearing a branded polo shirt for a company that I knew had folded 6 months ago. "Thank God," Mom breathed when she saw me. She looked at me like I was a messiah. "Ronnie is here. She will know what to read." Logan stopped pacing. He ran a hand through his hair, looking annoyed rather than relieved. "It is a liquidity issue, Ronnie," he said, before I had even taken off my coat. "A short-term cash flow problem. The bank is being completely unreasonable. We just need to bridge the gap until my next round of funding comes through for the logistics startup." I did not look at him. I looked at the table. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I did not offer comfort. I did not say it would be okay. I reached for the stack of papers nearest to me. The top document was a notice of sale. The auction date was set for 3 weeks from Tuesday. I started to read. I went into what my colleagues called the zone. The emotional part of my brain shut down, and the analytical engine took over. I sorted the papers into piles: mortgage arrears, tax liens, credit card statements, second mortgage documents, HELOC agreements. The picture that emerged was not a liquidity issue. It was an autopsy. They had not paid the mortgage in 14 months. They had refinanced the house 3 years ago, taking out equity to pay off credit cards, but the credit cards were maxed out again. The interest rate on the refinance was predatory, an adjustable arm that had exploded upward 6 months ago, doubling their monthly payment. I picked up a bank statement from the home equity line of credit. I scanned the transaction history. Target, Walmart, Best Buy. And then I saw the transfers. $5,000 to LP. Consults, $8,000 to LP. Global, $12,000 to Apex Strategy Group. I recognized the initials, LP, Logan Phelps. I looked up. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. "What is Apex Strategy Group?" I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of inflection. Logan stiffened. "That is my holding company, for the business development." "And LP Consults?" I asked. "Consulting fees," he said, lifting his chin defiantly. "I was managing the renovation projects for the house. Dad needed help overseeing the contractors. I charged a standard management fee." I looked at the house. The ceiling in the hallway still had a water stain from a leak I had pointed out 4 years ago. The cabinets were the same peeling laminate. There had been no renovations. "You paid yourself consulting fees out of the home equity line," I said. "You stripped the equity out of this house to pay yourself a salary for work you did not do." Mom looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "He was helping us. Ronnie. He was trying to get the business off the ground so he could retire us. He needed capital. We invested in him." "You invested the roof over your heads," I said. "And now it is gone," Dad whispered. I looked back at the numbers. I pulled out my laptop from my bag and opened a spreadsheet. I started inputting the balances. Principal balance, interest arrears, late fees, legal fees from the bank's attorneys, property tax liens that had been sold to a third-party collector. I summed the column. The number blinking back at me was $448,621.14. To save the house, to stop the auction, to clear the liens, and to bring the principal down to a manageable level where the monthly payments could actually be afforded on a Social Security income. That was the number. $450,000. I stared at the screen. That was my number. That was almost exactly the amount I had in my net worth. It was my stocks. It was my bond ladder. It was the cash I had been saving for a down payment on a house in the Highlands. It was my 401k, which I would have to borrow against and pay penalties on. It was 10 years of working 80-hour weeks. It was 10 years of missing parties, of driving a 10-year-old car, of bringing leftovers to work. It was my freedom. If I wrote this check, I was back to zero. I was back to being a 22-year-old with nothing but a degree and a job. I looked at my parents. They were terrified. They were not bad people. They were just weak people who loved their son too much to say no, and who lacked the financial literacy to understand that they were drowning until the water was already in their lungs. If I walked away, they would be homeless. They would lose the only asset they had. They would be destitute in their 60s. I looked at Logan. He was watching me with a mixture of fear and resentment, waiting for me to fix it, hating me for being the one who could. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, tearing sensation. It was the feeling of my dreams being incinerated to keep them warm. "I can fix it," I said. The air left the room in a collective gasp. Mom started to sob. Dad put his head on the table. "But," I said, the word cut through their relief like a knife. "I am not giving you this money, and I am not lending you this money." Logan narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means I am buying the debt." I said, "I am going to execute a distressed asset acquisition. I will pay off the arrears, the taxes, and the principal. I will negotiate the penalties with the bank." I turned my laptop screen toward them, though I knew they would not understand the spreadsheet. "I am going to set up a limited liability company." I lied smoothly. It was not a lie, exactly, but the implication was different than the reality. It is for tax purposes and risk optimization. The bank will look more favorably on a corporate restructure than a personal bailout. It keeps your credit report from taking a further hit. They nodded eagerly. Risk optimization, corporate restructure. It sounded official. It sounded like magic. "I will handle the paperwork," I said. "You just need to sign." I spent the next 3 days in a blur of legal maneuvers. I took emergency leave from work. I liquidated my brokerage account. I watched the numbers that represented my blood, sweat, and tears vanish from my screen and reappear in an escrow account. I formed the entity, Blake Harbor LLC. I named it after the street where I had lived in my first apartment, the first place I had ever felt safe. I drafted the documents, a quitclaim deed, transferring the title of the property from Mark and Elaine Phelps to Blake Harbor LLC, a lease agreement, stipulating that Mark and Elaine Phelps were tenants of Blake Harbor LLC, with a monthly rent set at a nominal amount that covered insurance and property taxes. I sat them down at the kitchen table on Friday morning. The snow had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple. "Sign here," I said, pointing to the signature line on the deed. "And here," I said, pointing to the lease. They did not read it. They were so desperate to have the foreclosure notices gone, so desperate to return to the illusion of normalcy, that they would have signed a confession to a murder. "This keeps the asset safe," I explained, using the jargon I knew would glaze their eyes over. "It places the property in a protective hold. It stops the creditors from attaching liens to it if Logan's business has exposure in the future." "Oh, that is smart," Mom said, signing her name with a flourish. "You are such a genius. Ronnie, our little genius." Dad signed. Logan watched, arms crossed. "So the house is safe?" Logan asked. "The house is safe," I said. "Good job." "Ronnie," Logan said, clapping me on the shoulder. He sounded like a manager praising an intern for fetching the right coffee order. "I knew you would step up. That is what family does." I felt a coldness settle in my gut that was deeper than the winter chill. That is what family does. No, that is what I did. I drove back to Denver that night. I was exhausted. My bank accounts were empty. I had saved them. I had stopped the disaster. But as I drove, a realization began to dawn on me, cutting through the fatigue. They did not know what they had just done. They thought I had just paid off their mortgage. They thought life would go on exactly as before, with them as the masters of their domain, and me as the silent financier. But the deed was in my briefcase. I was not their financier anymore. I was not their safety net. I was their landlord. Blake Harbor LLC was a single-member LLC. I was the member. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the walls Logan leaned against while he pontificated about his next big break. I owned the ground they stood on. I laughed, alone in the car. It was a jagged, broken sound. When I got to my apartment, I did not go to sleep. I opened my laptop. I opened the master spreadsheet, the one that tracked every dollar they had ever taken from me. I created a new tab. I named it the nuclear option. I entered the data. Asset. 2. Maple Drive, Pueblo. CO. Owner, Blake Harbor. LLC. Tenant, Mark and Elaine Phelps. Lease status, month to month. Eviction clause, standard. I stared at the screen. I had paid $450,000 for a house I did not want, to save a family that did not appreciate me. But in doing so, I had accidentally acquired the one thing they had never given me: control. I typed a note in the bottom cell of the spreadsheet. If they ever cross the line. I saved the file, I closed the laptop, and for the first time in a week, I slept. I slept the sleep of someone who knows that while they may have lost the battle for their savings, they had quietly, unknowingly, won the war for the high ground. They just did not know they were conquered yet. The silence that followed the disconnection of the call was heavy, but it was not the suffocating weight I was used to. For years, ending a call with my parents left me feeling drained, like a battery that had been short-circuited. This time, standing in the center of my dark living room in Denver, the silence felt different. It felt sterile. It felt like a hospital room after the patient has finally been discharged. I looked at the phone in my hand. The screen was black. The connection was severed. "Okay, noted." I whispered the words again, tasting them. They were not angry words. They were administrative. They were the words I used when a client violated a covenant in a loan agreement. They were the words that signaled the end of a negotiation and the beginning of enforcement. My parents had just uninvited me to Christmas. They had chosen Logan's fragile ego over my presence. They had taken the $450,000 I had poured into their survival, wiped their feet on it, and slammed the door in my face because the man of the house felt insecure looking at the woman who owned it. A normal daughter would have collapsed on the sofa. A normal daughter would have cried until her eyes were swollen, wondering why she was not lovable enough. I did feel a sting, a sharp, phantom pain in the center of my chest where my hope used to live, but beneath the pain, something else was waking up. It was the cold, hard logic of the forensic accountant. I treated my family like a high-risk client who had just breached a contract. And when a client breaches a contract, you do not send them a fruit basket. You audit them. I walked into my small kitchen and opened my laptop. I did not go to social media. I did not text my friends to vent. I logged into the secure cloud server where I kept my personal files. I navigated to the folder labeled Blake Harbor LLC. I opened the operating agreement. I scrolled down to the ownership section. Sole member, Veronica Phelps. Manager, Veronica Phelps. I opened the deed. Grantee, Blake Harbor LLC. I stared at the pixels. For months, I had viewed these documents as a shield for them. I had told myself I created this structure to protect the house from Logan's creditors, to protect my parents from their own financial illiteracy. But looking at it now, under the harsh light of their rejection, I realized it was not just a shield, it was a sword. I had never intended to swing it. I had hoped to keep it sheathed forever, letting them play house while I paid for the stage. But they had just reminded me that in their story, I was only a prop. I closed the laptop, but I did not close the feeling. It sat in my gut, heavy and solid. It was leverage. I looked around my apartment. It was clean, modern, and completely empty. I had no decorations up. I had not bought a tree. I had assumed, like a fool, that I would be driving down to Pueblo, sleeping on the lumpy twin mattress in my childhood room, and eating dry turkey while listening to Logan brag about businesses that did not exist. I had two choices. I could spend Christmas alone, drinking wine and watching old movies, proving their point that I was the solitary, cold workaholic they imagined me to be. Or I could do something else. I picked up my phone again. I scrolled to Jade's contact. Jade was a data entry specialist at Northline. She was 26, a single mother to a 4-year-old boy named Leo. I knew she was struggling. I knew her ex-husband was absent and her family was on the East Coast. She had mentioned in the break room that she was just going to order Chinese food for Christmas because she could not afford to travel home. I typed a message. Hey Jade, I know it is last minute, but my plans changed. I am making a roast. Do you and Leo want to come over? There will be cookies. I hit send. I did not wait for a reply. I walked to my desk and grabbed a piece of stationery. I wrote a note to Mr. Dawson, my neighbor across the hall. He was a retired widower in his 70s who always collected my packages when I was traveling for audits. He rarely had visitors. Mr. Dawson, I am hosting dinner on Christmas Eve. If you do not have plans, I would love for you to join us. The door will be unlocked. I slid the note under his door. Then, I opened the group chat for the mentorship program I volunteered with on weekends. It was a program for high school students interested in finance and mathematics, mostly kids from underfunded districts. I knew many of them had home lives that were complicated, to say the least. I typed, if anyone needs a place to be on Christmas Eve, my place is open. There is food, there is Wi-Fi. No questions asked. Just let me know so I buy enough potatoes. By the time I went to bed, Jade had replied with a string of heart emojis and a confession that she had been dreading being alone. 3 of my students had messaged me privately, asking if it was really okay if they came by. I went to sleep without crying. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, my apartment looked like a scene from a chaotic, low-budget sitcom. I had gone to the grocery store and bought the biggest prime rib I could find. I bought 5 pounds of potatoes. I bought green beans, dinner rolls, 3 pies, and a gallon of vanilla ice cream. I did not count the cost. For the first time in years, I spent money without calculating the return on investment or worrying if I would need it to bail someone out of jail. By 6 o'clock, the apartment was full. It was not the elegant, tense dinner parties my mother tried to throw, where everyone was terrified of using the wrong fork. It was a mess. Jade was in the kitchen, laughing as Leo tried to help mash the potatoes, sending lumps of starch flying onto the counter. Mr. Dawson had arrived wearing a tie from the 1970s and holding a bottle of sparkling cider. He was currently sitting on my sofa, explaining the plot of a black-and-white western to two 16-year-old math whizzes who looked surprisingly interested. I moved through the room, filling glasses, checking the oven, dodging a remote control car that Leo was driving into the baseboards. The air smelled of rosemary and garlic and melting butter. It smelled like life. There was Marcus, a junior who was brilliant at calculus but lived in a foster group home. He was staring at the prime rib resting on the cutting board like it was a religious artifact. There was Sarah, a senior who wanted to be an actuary, whose parents had kicked her out a month ago for coming out. She was sitting on the floor, teaching Leo how to make a snowflake out of a napkin. I brought the food to the table. We did not have enough matching chairs, so we pulled up the piano bench and a folding chair from the closet. We did not have enough matching plates, so Mr. Dawson ate off a salad bowl. Nobody cared. We sat down. There was a moment of awkwardness, the hesitation of strangers thrown together by the gravity of having nowhere else to go. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat. He raised his glass of cider. "To the chef," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "and to an open door. You have no idea what an open door means until you have stared at a closed one for too long." We clinked glasses. The awkwardness shattered. We ate. We ate until the platters were empty. We talked over each other. Jade told stories about the disastrous dates she had been on. Marcus debated Sarah on the probability mechanics of winning the lottery. Mr. Dawson told us about the Christmas of 1955, when he got a bicycle and rode it into a snowbank. I sat at the head of the table, not because I demanded the seat, but because they had left it for me. I watched them. I watched Jade wipe sauce off Leo's chin with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I watched Mr. Dawson listen to Marcus explain cryptocurrency, nodding as if he understood every word, just happy to be spoken to. I looked at the mashed potatoes on my plate. This is it, I thought. This is the feeling my parents had been chasing with their credit cards and their social climbing. This is the feeling they thought Logan could provide if they just gave him enough money to be successful. But you cannot buy this. You cannot finance this. I realized that for 32 years, I had been starving at a banquet table because I was too busy serving everyone else. I had thought family was a debt you paid off. I thought it was an obligation you fulfilled. I looked at these people. I shared no DNA with them. I owed them nothing. They owed me nothing. And yet, the warmth in this room was realer than anything I had ever felt in the drafty house in Pueblo. "Hey, Veronica," Jade called out. "Smile." I looked up. She had her phone out. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. Startled and unself-conscious. I was holding a dish rag. My hair was falling out of its clip. I had a smudge of flour on my cheek. Click. Later that night, after everyone had left, carrying tinfoil packages of leftovers and hugging me with a force that surprised me, I sat on my sofa. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a warm quiet. The dishwasher was humming. Jade sent me the photo. I zoomed in on the screen. The woman in the picture did not look like the tired forensic accountant who worked 60 hours a week. She did not look like the daughter who kept a ledger of resentment. She looked happy. Her eyes were crinkled at the corners. Her posture was relaxed. She looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. I saved the photo. I set it as my background. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere down south, in a house I owned, my parents and my brother were probably sitting in a living room that felt like a courtroom, trying to pretend that their exclusion of me was a noble act. They were probably waiting for the phone to ring. They were waiting for me to call, to apologize, to beg to be let back in for New Year's. They were waiting for the Bank of Veronica to reopen. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I made 2 promises to the reflection in the window. First, I would never again beg for a seat at a table where I was viewed as a wallet. If they did not want me, they did not get me. Second, the next time the phone rang, the next time the crisis hit, and it would hit, because gravity always wins, the answer would not be yes. It would not be, let me check my savings. It would not be, let me fix it. The answer would be no. The word felt foreign, dangerous, and exhilarating. I turned off the lights. I walked to my bedroom. I crawled into my clean, empty bed in my quiet apartment. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like the backup plan. I felt like the CEO of my own existence. And as I drifted off to sleep, I whispered my new mantra one last time. Okay, noted. The morning after Christmas was supposed to be quiet. I woke up with a strange, unfamiliar lightness in my chest, the residue of the night before. My apartment still smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted meat. There was a stack of mismatched plates in the dishwasher that I needed to unload, and a thank you text from Jade on my phone that made me smile. For the first time in memory, I did not feel the post-holiday hangover of emotional exhaustion. I made coffee. I watched the steam rise in the pale winter sunlight. I thought, foolishly, that the peace would last. It lasted exactly until 9 o'clock. There was no buzzer from the lobby. Someone had clearly tailgated a neighbor into the building. The pounding on my front door was not a knock. It was a demand. It was a rhythmic, violent thudding that shook the frame. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Only 3 people in the world felt entitled enough to beat down my door on a holiday weekend. I opened the door. Elaine, Mark, and Logan stood in the hallway. They brought the cold in with them, a gust of freezing air that instantly cut through the warmth of my apartment. They looked disheveled, their eyes rimmed with red, but it was not the redness of sorrow, it was the redness of rage. They did not say hello. They did not say Merry Christmas. They surged past me into the living room like a SWAT team raiding a suspect's hideout. Elaine spun around, her coat still buttoned to her chin, her face twisted. "How could you?" she hissed. I closed the door gently. I turned to face them, leaning back against the wood. Crossing my arms, I did not speak. "How could you tell people?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Aunt Sarah called me this morning. She asked why you were eating dinner with strangers. She asked why the house was dark on Christmas Eve. Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? Do you have any idea what you have done to our reputation?" I stayed silent. I watched her hands shake. Logan stepped forward. He was wearing a leather jacket that I knew cost $600 because I had paid the credit card bill it was charged to 3 years ago. "You are loving this, aren't you?" he sneered. "You are playing the victim. You are painting this picture of the poor, neglected sister just to make me look like a monster." Naomi spent the whole drive home asking me questions. She wants to know why the person who saved the house was not invited to dinner. You poisoned her against me. Veronica, you manipulated the narrative. "We told you it was nothing personal," Dad shouted, slamming his hand onto the back of my sofa. "It was one night for your brother to feel like a man. And you had to go and broadcast your pity party to the whole world. Now the whole family is talking. They think we are ungrateful." I looked at them. I looked at their flushed faces, their frantic movements. I listened to the accusations piling up like trash in a landfill. They were not mad that I was hurt. They were mad that the audience had seen the play and disliked the characters. I waited. I knew the rhythm of these confrontations. First came the anger, then came the guilt, and finally, inevitably, came the ask. The room fell into a heavy, panting silence as they ran out of breath. Elaine unbuttoned her coat. She sat down on the edge of my armchair, looking suddenly frail. This was the pivot. "We are under so much pressure. Veronica," she said, her voice dropping to a tremble. "You do not understand. The storm last week was brutal. The roof is leaking in the master bedroom. We have buckets everywhere." "The furnace is making a grinding noise," Dad added, looking at the floor. "The repairman said it is the blower motor. It is going to die any day now. If it dies, the pipes will freeze." "And the business is so close," Logan said, changing his tone from aggressive to pleadingly reasonable. I have a lead on a government contract for the logistics firm. It is a guaranteed win, Ronnie. But I need to show liquid capital to bid. If I get this, everything changes. I can pay for the roof. I can pay for the furnace. Mark looked at me. He composed his face into the expression of a patriarch offering a generous compromise. So here's the solution, he said. You cover the roof repairs, you replace the furnace, and you give Logan a bridge loan for the contract. If you do that, we can put this whole ugly Christmas mess behind us. We will tell the family it was a misunderstanding. We will forgive you for embarrassing us. I stared at him. He was negotiating. He was offering me the privilege of being forgiven for their cruelty in exchange for another $20,000 of my money. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. They began to shift uncomfortably. They were used to me arguing. They were used to me crying. They were used to me explaining why I could not afford it, and then eventually caving in when they pressed the guilt button. They did not know what to do with silence. Is she having a stroke? Logan muttered. I pushed off the door. I walked past them, ignoring Logan entirely. I went to the filing cabinet in the corner of the room, the one I kept locked. I took a key from my pocket. I unlocked the top drawer. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It contained paper trails that went back over a decade. I walked to the coffee table. I placed the envelope in the center of the glass surface. I slid it toward them. What is this? Elaine asked. Open it, I said. My voice was calm. It was terrifyingly level. It was the voice I used when I was deposing a suspect who thought they had covered their tracks. Elaine reached out and opened the clasp. She pulled out the stack of papers. The top document was a spreadsheet. It was printed in landscape mode, the font small to fit all the columns. It was the master ledger. It started with the $650 sent during my sophomore year of college. It tracked every utility bill, every car repair, every bailout, every loan that was never repaid. It tracked the interest I had lost. It tracked the penalties I had absorbed. And at the bottom, in bold black ink, was the distressed asset acquisition of the house. The total sum was at the bottom right. It was a number that made the air leave the room. $612,488.50. Elaine's hand trembled. She turned the page. The next document was a copy of the check for the $450,000. The next document was the quitclaim deed. The next document was the Articles of Organization for Blake Harbor, LLC. You kept score, Elaine whispered. She looked up at me, her face pale. All these years, you pretended it was fine. You said it was no big deal, but you were writing it all down. I am an accountant. Mom, I said, I do not pretend. I record. This is insane, Logan said, grabbing the spreadsheet. You are counting movie tickets from high school? You are counting groceries? This is sick. Veronica, you are obsessed. Read the last page, I said. Logan flipped to the back. He stared at the operating agreement of Blake Harbor, LLC. He stared at the lease agreement signed by Mark and Elaine Phelps. I stood up straight. I clasped my hands in front of me. You seem to be confused about the nature of our relationship. I said, you came in here demanding that I fix the roof and the furnace. You demanded that I invest in a business that has no revenue. You offered to forgive me for the crime of existing. I pointed at the papers. Let me clarify the reality for you. You are not homeowners who are temporarily down on your luck. You are tenants. You are living in a property owned by Blake Harbor, LLC. I am Blake Harbor, LLC. Dad stood up. His face was purple. Now listen here, young lady. That LLC business was just legal mumbo-jumbo you told us to sign to trick the bank. That is our house. We raised you in it. It was your house, I corrected him. Until you stopped paying the mortgage for 14 months. Until you stripped the equity to pay Logan's consulting fees. Until the bank was 3 days away from auctioning it off on the courthouse steps. I took a step closer. I bought that house. I bought it with my retirement fund. I bought it with my life savings. I bought it to keep you from living in a shelter. And the paperwork you signed. The paperwork you did not bother to read because you were too busy celebrating that someone else had cleaned up your mess states clearly that the title belongs to the company. "This is a trap!" Logan shouted. He threw the papers onto the floor. "You trapped them! You tricked your own parents so you could hold it over their heads. Family does not use contracts. Veronica. Family relies on trust. Family does not ban the person who saved the house from Christmas dinner." I said. The words hung in the air. They were not shouted. They were simple, brutal facts. Logan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I looked at Mark and Elaine. They were shrinking. They were looking at the spreadsheet, seeing the mathematical proof of their favoritism, the quantifiable evidence of their neglect. "I am not giving you money for the roof," I said. Elaine gasped. "But it is leaking." "Then I will send a contractor," I said. "A contractor that I hire. A contractor that I pay directly. No money will touch your hands. No money will go into Logan's accounts to be filtered into bogus consulting fees." I turned to Logan. "And I am not investing in your logistics firm. I am not investing in your app. I am not giving you a single cent. The Bank of Veronica is closed. Permanent liquidity freeze." "You cannot do this," Dad said. "We are your parents." "I am your landlord," I said, "and right now, you are delinquent tenants." I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You have 30 days, I said. "30 days for what?" Mom asked, her voice terrified. "30 days to start paying the rent stipulated in the lease you signed," I said. "It is a nominal amount. It barely covers the property taxes. But you will pay it. You will set up a standing order. If you miss a payment, if you are late, or if I find out that you have tried to take out a loan against a property you no longer own, I will initiate eviction proceedings." "Eviction?" Dad whispered. "You would evict us?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me to stay away from Christmas because my presence made his son feel small. I would process it like any other high-risk asset. I said, I would protect the company. "Get out," I said. They looked at me. For the first time in my life, they did not see the easy child. They did not see the safety net. They saw a stranger. They saw a woman who had finally learned that the only way to win a rigged game is to own the casino. They walked out. They did not slam the door. They walked out in silence, moving slowly, like people who had just survived a bomb blast and were checking to see if they still had all their limbs. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. My hands were shaking, but I was not crying. I walked back to the living room. The papers were scattered on the floor where Logan had thrown them. The master ledger lay open, the numbers stark against the white page. I picked them up. I stacked them neatly. I put them back in the envelope. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. It was cold. I was alone again, but the apartment did not feel empty. It felt fortified. I had said the word. I had said no. And the sky had not fallen. The world had not ended. I went to my desk and opened my laptop. I drafted an email to a roofing contractor in Pueblo. I wrote it with professional detachment. Subject: Urgent repair request. Property: 1402 Maple Drive. I hit send. Then, I opened the file named The Nuclear Option. I changed the status of the tenant from family to probation. I sat back and watched the snow start to fall again outside my window. It was going to be a long winter, but for the first time, I had a coat that was warm enough. 2 days after I locked my parents and brother out of my apartment, I walked into the office of Robert Sterling, a real estate attorney who had a reputation for being as expensive as he was ruthless. His office was on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, 5 blocks away from my own. It smelled of leather, espresso, and the terrifying quiet of billable hours. I sat across from him at a glass table that seemed to stretch on for miles. I did not bring a sob story. I did not bring a box of tissues. I brought 3 binders, color-coded and tabbed, containing the autopsy of my financial life. Mr. Sterling was a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed. He opened the first binder. He adjusted his glasses. I watched him read. I watched his eyes scan the articles of organization for Blake Harbor LLC. I watched him flip to the quitclaim deed, checking the recording stamp from the Pueblo County clerk. I watched him trace the line of the wire transfer receipt. $448,621.14. He closed the binder. He looked at me. Usually, when family members come to me with property disputes, he said, his voice gravelly and precise, it is a mess of handshake deals and verbal promises. It is he said, she said. It is a nightmare to litigate. He tapped the binder with his index finger. This, however, is not a mess. This is a fortress. I felt a knot in my chest loosen, a knot I had not realized I was holding tight. Is the ownership contestable? I asked. Mr. Sterling shook his head, not even slightly. The deed was transferred willingly. The consideration paid was substantial. You paid fair market value, or close enough to it, to clear the debt. They signed the transfer. They signed the lease acknowledgement. They have been living there for months under this arrangement without contesting it. He leaned forward. Legally speaking, Ms. Phelps, your parents are not homeowners. They are tenants. And based on the payment history you have provided here, or rather, the lack thereof, they are tenants who are significantly in breach of their lease. I nodded. That is what I thought. What is your goal? He asked. Do you want to evict them? I hesitated. The word hung in the air. Sharp and metallic. Eviction. Putting my parents on the curb. It was the nuclear option. Not yet, I said. I want to formalize the relationship. I want to move them from the gray area of family charity to the black and white reality of contractual obligation. I want a new lease, a strict one, and I want a repayment schedule for the arrears they owe the company. Mr. Sterling pulled a legal pad toward him. We can do that, he said. We will draft a residential lease agreement with strict covenants. We will include clauses for maintenance, if the roof leaks. They must notify you in writing. We will specify that no alterations or financial encumbrances can be made to the property without written consent from the landlord. That stops your brother from trying to use the house as collateral for a loan, which, given his history, he will likely attempt. He wrote something down. And we will add a cure or quit clause, he added. If they miss a rent payment by more than 5 days, the eviction process begins automatically. No more phone calls. No more guilt trips. The mechanism triggers itself. Draft it, I said. I left his office an hour later. The retainer fee was $3,000. I paid it without blinking. For the first time, I was not spending money to save them. I was spending money to protect myself from them. That afternoon, I did something that made my stomach turn, but I knew it was necessary. I walked down the hallway of my own office building to the Human Resources Department. I asked to speak with the Director of Compliance. I worked in forensic accounting. My reputation was my currency. I handled sensitive financial data for major corporations. If someone wanted to hurt me, they did not need a weapon. They just needed to whisper that I was unstable or financially compromised. And I knew Logan. When he felt cornered, he did not fight fair. He threw mud. I sat in the small, soundproof room with the compliance director, a woman named Sarah whom I had known for years. Is everything okay? Veronica? She asked, looking concerned. I need to make a formal disclosure, I said, keeping my voice steady. I am currently involved in a complex property dispute with my immediate family. It involves a significant amount of debt that I covered for them. I paused, taking a breath. My brother has a history of retaliatory behavior when he is denied money. There is a non-zero probability that he, or my parents, may contact the firm to make false allegations about my financial ethics or my character in an attempt to leverage me. I wanted to get ahead of it. I have documentation proving the legitimacy of all my assets and the source of funds for the property acquisition. Sarah looked shocked, but she typed notes into her secure terminal. Thank you for telling us, she said. We will flag your file. If any external communication comes in regarding you, it will be routed directly to legal counsel and me, not to your managers. You are safe here. Veronica. I walked back to my desk feeling lightheaded. It was humiliating to admit that my family was a professional liability. But as I sat down and looked at my screens, I realized I had just disarmed the only weapon Logan had left. He could scream all he wanted, but he could not touch my livelihood. 3 days later, the lease was ready. I did not email it. I did not drive it down to Pueblo. I sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. I included a cover letter. I wrote it 3 times before I was satisfied. It was not angry. It was not apologetic. Dear Mom and Dad, enclosed is the formal lease agreement for the property at 1402 Maple Drive, owned by Blake Harbor, LLC. This document formalizes the arrangement we agreed to when the company acquired the property to prevent foreclosure. Please review, sign, and return the original copy in the provided envelope by January 15th. The terms are non-negotiable. This agreement ensures that you have a secure place to live, provided the conditions of tenancy are met. This is not a punishment. This is a protection for both parties. As long as you live within these boundaries, you are safe. Veronica. I dropped the envelope in the mailbox. It made a heavy thud. The silence from Pueblo lasted 48 hours. Then, the ripples began. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. I saw the caller ID. Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was my father's older sister. She was the matriarch of the extended Phelps clan, a woman who wielded gossip like a gavel. She lived in Arizona but knew what everyone was eating for dinner in Colorado before the plates were cleared. I stared at the phone. In the past, I would have let it go to voicemail. I would have been terrified of her judgment. I would have assumed she was calling to scold me for being a bad daughter. I picked up. Hello, Aunt Beatrice? Veronica, she boomed. I want you to explain to me what on God's green earth is going on. Your mother called me crying. She said you are trying to kick them out of the house. She said you sent them legal papers. I took a sip of water. I sat down on my sofa. Mom is confused, I said calmly. I am not kicking them out. I sent them a lease renewal. A lease? Beatrice scoffed. Since when does a daughter charge her parents' rent? Since when does a child hold a deed over her father's head? They are saying you have lost your mind. Veronica. Logan says you are having some kind of breakdown and attacking the family finances. I listened to the narrative Logan was spinning. It was clever. He was painting me as the unstable aggressor, the greedy child biting the hand that fed her. He was banking on the fact that I would be too private, too steady to defend myself. He was banking on the old Veronica. Aunt Beatrice, I said, can I ask you a question? What? She snapped. Did Mom tell you who paid off the mortgage last year? There was a pause. What do you mean? Mark said he refinanced it. He said he got a great rate because the house had appreciated so much. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. The house was in foreclosure. Aunt Beatrice, the auction date was set. They hadn't paid the mortgage in 14 months. That is a lie, she said instantly. Mark would never let it get that bad. I have the foreclosure notice. I said, I have the bank statements. And I have the wire transfer receipt for $448,000 that I paid to save it. The line went dead silent. 400, she trailed off. You paid $400,000? I liquidated my retirement. I said, I drained my savings. I bought the debt so they wouldn't be homeless. That is why the house is in an LLC. It is not because I stole it. It is because I bought it. But, she stammered, but Logan said he was managing the estate. He said he was the one keeping everything afloat. Logan, I said, my voice hardening, stripped $60,000 of equity out of that house to pay himself consulting fees for renovations that never happened. That is why they couldn't pay the mortgage. I heard Beatrice intake a sharp breath. She was a gossip, yes, but she was also a woman who understood the value of a dollar. She came from a generation that believed in balancing checkbooks. Are you telling me the truth, Veronica? I can email you the documents right now. I said, I have the receipts. I have the master ledger. Send them, she whispered. I hung up. I opened my laptop. I attached the summary of the foreclosure buyout and the spreadsheet showing the equity stripping by Logan. I hit send. The explosion was silent, but the shockwave was instant. Within 24 hours, the narrative within the Phelps family fractured. For years, Logan had been the golden boy, the entrepreneur, the one destined for greatness. I was just the background noise. But numbers are stubborn things. You can argue with a memory. You can argue with an opinion. You cannot argue with a wire transfer receipt. Beatrice told her sister. Her sister told my cousins. My cousins told their parents. The phone stopped ringing with accusations. Instead, I started getting text messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Thinking of you. Ronnie, let us know if you need anything. Just heard about the house. Wow. They were not apologies. My family was not the kind that apologized, but they were acknowledgments. The curtain had been pulled back. They saw the stagehands. They saw who was actually pulling the ropes. Logan did not take it well. He posted a long, rambling status on social media about loyalty and snakes in the grass. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. He wrote about how money changes people, how the corporate world destroys souls, how he pitied those who valued contracts over blood. I read it while drinking coffee in my office. I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I didn't defend myself. I realized that defending myself would imply that his opinion mattered. It would imply that we were peers having a debate. We were not peers. I was the landlord. He was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. A week later, the certified mail receipt arrived on my desk. It was signed by Mark Phelps. 2 days after that, the lease arrived. It was crumpled, as if someone had balled it up in a rage before smoothing it out again. The signature was jagged, but it was there. They had signed. They had accepted the terms. They had acknowledged, legally and bindingly, that the power dynamic had shifted. I scanned the document into the cloud. I filed the original in the safe. Then, I opened my email. There was a message from Mr. Sterling. Subject: Contingency Protocols. Dear Miss Phelps, I have received confirmation that the lease has been executed. This is a positive step. However, given the history of financial delinquency, we must be prepared for immediate enforcement. If they fail to remit the first rent payment by February 1st, or if they fail to provide proof of renter's insurance as stipulated, we have the grounds to move for an unconditional quit. Furthermore, if the terms are not met by the end of the first quarter, March 31st, you have the absolute legal right to list the property for sale to recover your capital. No further permission from the tenants would be required. The clock is ticking. Robert Sterling. I looked at the calendar on my wall. It was mid-January. March 31st. I took a red marker. I circled the date. It wasn't a deadline for me. It was a deadline for them. For 30 years, I had lived on their timeline. I had waited for them to pay me back. I had waited for them to notice me. I had waited for them to love me. Now they were waiting on me. I capped the marker. The red circle looked like a target, or maybe it looked like a stop sign. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet of my office. I felt a strange sensation. It was not happiness. It was not joy. It was the cold, clean satisfaction of a ledger that finally, after a lifetime of red ink, was about to balance. If they paid, fine, the house was safe. If they didn't, fine, the house was sold. Either way, I was free. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text message from Logan. It was short, dismissive, and devoid of punctuation. Don't make this complicated. Stay home tonight. We don't need your drama. I stared at the screen. I knew exactly what he was referring to. My parents were hosting a dinner party at the Golden Stag, one of the most expensive steakhouses in Colorado Springs. The purpose of the dinner was twofold. First, they wanted to officially introduce Naomi, Logan's fiancée, to the extended family. Second, and more importantly, they wanted to silence the whispers that had started circulating after I sent Aunt Beatrice the financial records. They wanted to put on a show. They wanted to prove that the Phelps family was still intact, still prosperous, and that the rumors of foreclosure and debt were just malicious gossip spread by a jealous daughter. I had not been invited. I put the phone down on my desk. I was fine with it. I had no desire to watch them spend money they did not have on steaks they could not afford. Then my office phone rang. "Veronica," Aunt Beatrice's voice boomed down the line. "Are you dressed?" "I am at work, Aunt Beatrice," I said. "Leave early," she commanded. "I am picking you up in an hour. You are coming to dinner." I was told not to come. I said, "Logan was quite specific. Logan does not decide who is family and who is not." She snapped, "And he certainly does not decide who sits at my table. I am the guest of honor, apparently, since I am the eldest, and my +1 is my niece. Put on something expensive. Veronica, I want you to look like the woman who owns the roof over their heads, not the girl who scrubs their floors." I did as she asked. I went home and changed. I did not put on the sensible gray suits I wore to audit meetings. I put on a black dress that was fitted and sharp, with a neckline that was elegant but severe. I put on heels that clicked with authority against the floor. I pulled my hair back. I applied red lipstick, a color I rarely wore because I thought it drew too much attention. Tonight, I wanted attention. When we walked into the private dining room at the Golden Stag, the air changed instantly. It was a room of mahogany and velvet, lit by the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. A long table was set with white linens and gleaming silverware. My parents were at the head of the table, holding wine glasses, laughing too loudly at a joke my cousin had made. Logan was standing next to a woman I assumed was Naomi, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. Then they saw me. The laughter died in my mother's throat. She looked like she had swallowed an ice cube. Logan's face went from charming host to thunderous fury in less than a second. "What is she doing here?" Logan asked, his voice carrying across the silent room. "She is with me," Aunt Beatrice said, marching to a seat near the center of the table. "Sit down, Veronica." I pulled out the chair directly across from Logan and Naomi. I sat down. I placed my small black clutch on the pristine white tablecloth. I did not say a word. I just looked at them. The tension was so thick it felt physical. My cousins, who usually ignored me, were staring at me with wide eyes. They had heard the stories. They knew about the $450,000. They were looking at me not as the invisible cousin, but as a curiosity. "Let's just order," Dad said quickly, signaling a waiter. He looked terrified. He refused to make eye contact with me. The dinner began in a stilted, excruciating fashion. Everyone tried to make small talk about the weather, about sports, about anything other than the elephant in the room. Naomi was beautiful. She was sharp-eyed and poised, wearing a suit that I recognized as designer. I knew she was a corporate attorney for a tech firm in Denver. She had intelligent eyes that darted around the table, analyzing the micro-expressions of the family members. She was sensing the undercurrents. "So, Veronica," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "Logan tells me you work in accounting." "Forensic accounting," I corrected gently. "I specialize in fraud detection and asset recovery." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. That must be intense work." "It is very revealing." I said, "You learn a lot about people by looking at their ledgers. Numbers tell stories that people refuse to admit." Logan slammed his wine glass down. "Okay, that is enough," he said. He looked around the table, a tight, fake smile plastered on his face. "Look, I know there have been some rumors flying around. I know Veronica has been telling tales out of school, trying to make herself look like a martyr." "Logan," Mom hissed, trying to stop him. But he was rolling now. He had had 2 glasses of scotch, and his ego was bruised. "No, Mom, let's address it," he said. "Veronica has this idea in her head that she saved us. She loves the drama. She paid a bill for us to help with a liquidity crunch, and now she acts like she owns us. It is pathetic, really. She is trying to ruin this night because she is jealous that I'm getting married and moving forward, while she is stuck in the past counting pennies." The table was dead silent. My cousin dropped a fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Naomi turned to look at Logan. Her expression was unreadable. Then she turned back to me. "Is that true?" she asked. "Is it just a loan?" I looked at her. I saw a woman who valued facts. I saw a professional who likely dealt with contracts all day. I did not raise my voice. I did not look angry. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out a folded document. It was a copy of the Articles of Organization for Blake Harbor, LLC, and the deed to the house. I placed it on the table. I slid it across the white linen, past the breadbasket, past the untouched butter, until it rested in front of Naomi. "It is not a loan," I said. Naomi picked up the papers. She put on a pair of reading glasses she pulled from her own purse. She began to read. Logan tried to snatch the papers away. "Naomi, don't read that trash. It is just legal mumbo-jumbo she made up." Naomi slapped his hand away. It was a quick, sharp motion. "Let me read," she said. She scanned the deed. She scanned the ownership structure. She looked at the transfer date. She looked at the amount. She looked up at me. "You own the house," she stated. I nodded. "Blake Harbor, LLC owns the house. I am the sole member of Blake Harbor, LLC. Naomi turned to my parents. Elaine and Mark were pale, shrinking into their high-backed chairs. "Did you know this?" Naomi asked them. We signed something," Dad stammered. "Veronica said it was to protect the house from the bank. She said it was a formality." "A formality?" Naomi repeated. She pointed to a paragraph. "This is a quitclaim deed. You transferred all rights and title to the company. And this?" She pulled out the second sheet. "This is a lease," she said. "You are paying rent?" "Well, we haven't paid yet," Mom said defensively. "She said we had 30 days. It is a misunderstanding. Veronica is just being cold. She is trying to control us." Naomi looked at Logan. Her eyes were not filled with love anymore. They were filled with calculation. "You told me you were inheriting that house," she said. "You told me we could leverage the equity to fund your startup. You told me your parents were gifting it to us as a wedding present." Logan's face turned a blotchy red. "They were. They are. Veronica tricked them. She stole it out from under us." I spoke again. My voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a gavel. "I paid $448,000 to stop a foreclosure auction that was 3 days away," I said. "I paid off the liens caused by Logan stripping the equity for consulting fees on work he never did." "Liar!" Logan shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair over. Naomi did not flinch. She looked at the paper again. She looked at the bank transfer receipt attached to the back. $450,000, she whispered. She looked at me with a strange mixture of horror and respect. "You really paid that?" "I did," I said. "Why?" she asked. "Because they are my parents," I said, "and because I didn't want them to be homeless. But I will not let them be irresponsible with my future anymore." At that exact moment, a young man in a black uniform walked into the private room. He looked out of place among the waiters in their white jackets. He held a large manila envelope. He looked around the table. "I am looking for Mark and Elaine Phelps," he said. "I am Mark," my father said, his voice shaking. The man walked over and placed the envelope in front of him. "You have been served," the man said. "What is this?" Mom shrieked. "Open it," I said. I knew what it was. Mr. Sterling had arranged it. It was theatrical. Yes, but Mr. Sterling believed in making a point. Dad opened the envelope with trembling fingers. He pulled out a document with a red header. "Notice to cure or vacate." He read the first line and stopped. He couldn't speak. "What does it say?" Naomi asked. She leaned over and took the paper from Dad's limp hand. She read it aloud. Her voice was steady, the voice of a lawyer reading a verdict. "Notice to tenant. You are in violation of your lease agreement dated January 10th. Violation 1. Failure to provide proof of renter's insurance. Violation 2. Unauthorized attempt to secure a line of credit against the property. You have 3 days to cure these violations, or eviction proceedings will commence immediately." The room erupted. "Eviction?" Aunt Beatrice shouted. "You are evicting them?" I looked at Logan. "You tried to borrow against the house, didn't you?" I asked. "You tried to use the house as collateral for your government contract bid. That is why the title search flagged it. That is why Mr. Sterling got the alert." Logan looked like a cornered animal. I was going to pay it back. It was just a bridge loan. I didn't think you would find out. It is not your house. Logan, I said, my voice finally rising, sharp and cutting. You cannot mortgage a house you do not own. That is fraud. Elaine began to weep, loud, heaving sobs that echoed off the mahogany walls. How can you do this to us? Veronica? In front of everyone? We are your family. You broke the lease, I said. I told you, I am not your daughter right now. I am your landlord, and you are a liability. Naomi stood up. She picked up the lease. She picked up the deed. She folded them neatly. She looked at Logan, who was standing there, panting, his face slick with sweat. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the engagement ring. It was a modest ring, one that I suspected my parents had helped pay for. She placed it on the table next to the butter dish. Naomi? Logan said. Baby. Wait, she is crazy. Don't listen to her. Naomi looked at him. She looked at him with absolute clarity. You lied to me, she said. You lied about the house. You lied about your business. You lied about your family. She turned to me. I am sorry, she said. You have nothing to be sorry for. I said, you just got the audit report before you invested. Consider it a saving. Naomi nodded. She looked back at Logan one last time. I cannot build a life with a man who treats his sister like collateral, she said. She turned and walked out of the room. She did not look back. The silence that followed her exit was heavy enough to crush bones. Logan stared at the ring. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wild. You ruined everything, he screamed. He grabbed the notice to cure or vacate and ripped it in half. He ripped it into quarters. He threw the confetti of paper at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Rip it up, I said calm. It doesn't change anything. Mr. Sterling has the original, and the 3-day clock started the moment that man handed it to you. I stood up. I picked up my clutch. I looked at Aunt Beatrice, who was looking at me with a stunned expression that looked suspiciously like pride. I think I have lost my appetite, I said. I looked at my parents. They were huddled together, looking at the shredded paper on the floor, realizing that their performance of wealth had just cost them their last remaining safety net. Fix the insurance, I said to them, and stop trying to mortgage my property, or the next notice won't be a warning. It will be the sheriff. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I walked past the shocked hostess. I walked out into the cold night air of Colorado Springs. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like snow and pine. It tasted clean. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Sterling. Delivery confirmed. Shall we proceed with the next step? I looked at the text. I looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant. I typed back. Wait 3 days. If they don't cure, we file. I got into my car. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The red lipstick was perfect. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a backup plan. I started the car and drove north, leaving the wreckage in the rearview mirror, knowing that for the first time in the history of the Phelps family, the bill had finally come due, and I wasn't the one paying it. The fallout from the dinner at the Golden Stag was immediate, toxic, and entirely predictable. When a narcissist loses control of the narrative, they do not reflect on their actions. They do not apologize. They scorch the earth. Logan did not go home to reflect on why his fiancée had left his engagement ring next to the butter dish. He went home to launch a war. The campaign began the next morning. It started with phone calls to every relative in the Phelps family directory, from the cousins in Idaho to the great-aunts in Florida who barely knew my name. Logan's version of events was a masterpiece of fiction. According to him, I had manipulated our aging parents into signing over their home while they were in a state of distress. He claimed I had tricked them with confusing legal jargon, effectively stealing their retirement assets so I could hold it hostage. He used phrases like elder financial abuse and predatory lending. He painted a picture of a cold, heartless corporate accountant who had lost her soul and was now preying on her own flesh and blood for profit. I did not hear these calls directly. Of course, I heard about them from Aunt Beatrice, who called me daily with updates, her voice trembling with a mixture of outrage and vindication. He told cousin Sarah that you forged the signature on the deed. Beatrice told me on Tuesday. He told Uncle Bob that you have been skimming money from their accounts for years. He is desperate. Veronica, he sounds like a cornered rat. I sat in my office, staring at the Denver skyline, sipping lukewarm coffee. Let him talk, I said. But he is ruining your name, Beatrice insisted. You have to defend yourself. You have to call them and explain. I don't have to do anything, I said. The deed is recorded with the county. The bank transfer is verified. The truth has a paper trail. Lies have to be constantly reinvented. I am not going to waste my energy fighting a man who is drowning in his own fabrications. While Logan attacked my character, my parents attacked my conscience. They did not use anger. They used the weapon they had honed over 30 years, guilt. My phone became a ticker tape of emotional manipulation. They sent text messages that were paragraphs long, rambling streams of consciousness that ignored all punctuation and logic. We are your parents. Veronica, how can you treat us like strangers? We gave you life. We sacrificed everything for you. Do you remember when we bought you that bicycle when you were 7? Do you remember when we drove you to college? We have always been there for you. Now you are treating us like enemies because of money. Money is not everything. Family is everything. Please, Ronnie, stop this madness. Sign the house back over. Let us be a family again. I read the messages. I felt the old familiar tug in my chest, the conditioned reflex to fix it, to soothe them, to be the good girl who makes the uncomfortable feelings go away. But then I would look at the lease agreement on my desk. I would look at the spreadsheet that showed the $450,000 they had incinerated. I would remember the way they looked at me when they told me not to come to Christmas. I did not reply. I moved the messages to a folder labeled evidence. The escalation happened 3 days later. I was in the middle of a risk assessment meeting for a pharmaceutical client when my office line rang. It was Sarah from Human Resources. Her voice was tight. Veronica, could you come down to my office? Now, please. I walked down the hallway. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew what this was. I had warned them it might happen. But knowing an earthquake is coming does not stop the ground from shaking. When I entered Sarah's office, the head of the legal department, a sharp man named David, was also there. They looked serious. We just received a call, David said, gesturing for me to sit. It was from a man claiming to be your brother, Logan Phelps. I nodded. I clasped my hands in my lap. He made some serious allegations. David continued, looking at his notes. He claimed that you have been using company resources to facilitate personal real estate transactions. He claimed that the funds you used to acquire a property in Pueblo were illicitly obtained. He suggested that we should audit your accounts because your lifestyle does not match your salary. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. It was not shame. It was pure, unadulterated fury. Logan was not just trying to hurt my feelings anymore. He was trying to destroy my livelihood. He was trying to cut off the income that made me independent, thinking that if he broke me financially, I would have to crawl back into the mud with them. Did he provide any evidence? I asked. My voice was steady. No, Sarah said. He was agitated. He was shouting. He demanded to speak to the CEO. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the flash drive I had prepared weeks ago, after my first meeting with Sarah. Here's the forensic accounting of my personal finances. I said, it traces every dollar of the $450,000 used to purchase the asset. It comes from my savings, my liquidated stock portfolio, and a loan against my 401k. The property was purchased to prevent foreclosure on my parents' home. The structure is a single-member LLC. Everything is disclosed. Everything is legal. David took the drive. He looked at me. We do not doubt you. Veronica, he said, you warned us this might happen. But I need to tell you, from a legal standpoint, this call constitutes harassment. He is attempting to interfere with your employment. I know, I said. If he calls again, David said, his eyes hard, we will not just hang up. We will have our external counsel send a cease and desist letter, and I would strongly recommend you consider a restraining order. This kind of behavior tends to escalate. I walked back to my desk feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and invincibility. Logan had played his ace. He had gone for the throat, and he had missed. He had missed because he assumed I was hiding something, because he assumed everyone operated with the same lack of integrity that he did. He did not understand that I lived my life in the daylight, where every penny was accounted for. I sent a text to Mr. Sterling. He called my employer. Proceed with the strict enforcement protocols. Down in Pueblo, the reality of their situation was beginning to set in like rot in wet wood. The deadline I had given them in the notice to cure or vacate was approaching. They had not fixed the insurance. They had not paid the rent. The house itself was turning against them. The roof leak in the master bedroom had worsened after another winter storm. Without the money to fix it, they had resorted to using blue tarps and buckets. The furnace motor finally died 2 days after the dinner party. They were heating the house with space heaters, huddled in the living room, watching their breath fog in the air. It was a physical manifestation of their financial choices. They were living in the ruins of their own denial. Logan, desperate to salvage his crumbling image and his non-existent business, tried to bypass me. He went to the local bank, the one where the manager knew our family name. He tried to secure a business loan. He walked in with his charm turned up to 10, wearing his best suit, talking about government contracts and guaranteed returns. When the loan officer asked for collateral, Logan offered the house. He told them it was a family asset. He told them he had power of attorney. He told them the LLC was just a shell company he controlled. The loan officer ran the title search. I heard about the scene later from an old high school friend who worked as a teller. She said the loan officer came back to the desk with a piece of paper. He told Logan that he had no legal standing to encumber the property. He told Logan that the property belonged to Blake Harbor LLC, and the sole signatory was Veronica Phelps. He told Logan that attempting to pledge an asset he did not own was fraud. She said Logan turned a color she had never seen before. He started shouting that there was a mistake, that his sister was a thief, that the system was rigged. Security had to escort him out. He walked out into the parking lot, humiliated in the town where he had always been the golden boy. He got into his truck, the truck I had saved from repossession years ago, and couldn't get it to start because the starter was failing and he had no money to fix it. The final blow to his ego came not from a bank, but from Naomi. I did not speak to her directly, but Aunt Beatrice, who had taken it upon herself to be the historian of the family's collapse, forwarded me the screenshot of the text message Naomi had sent to Logan. It had circulated through the family group chat like wildfire. I love the potential I saw in you, Logan, but potential is not a plan. I cannot marry a man who lies to his partner. I cannot build a life with someone who treats his sister like an ATM and his parents like a shield. I want a partner, not a dependent. Do not contact me again. That message was the final crack in the dam. The extended family, the cousins and aunts and uncles who had sat on the fence, who had wanted to stay neutral, suddenly found their voices. They saw the documentation I had sent. They heard about the scene at the bank. They saw Naomi run for the hills. They realized that for 20 years, they had been applauding the wrong child. I started receiving emails from cousins I hadn't spoken to since graduation. I had no idea you were carrying all that. One wrote, "We always thought Logan was the successful one. I am so sorry we didn't see it." You are doing the right thing. Another wrote, "Don't let them drag you down." The narrative had flipped. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter. I was the martyr who had finally had enough. I did not revel in their support. I did not gloat. I knew that if I had gone bankrupt saving the house, they would have pity for me, not respect. They respected me now because I had won. People love a winner, even in a family tragedy. I maintained my silence. I became a ghost to my parents and brother. I blocked their numbers on my personal phone. I set up a filter on my email so that anything from their addresses went directly to a folder that was auto-forwarded to Mr. Sterling. I did not argue. I did not explain. I did not defend. I practiced the strategy of the gray rock. I was boring. I was impenetrable. I was unresponsive to their emotional storms. Every time they tried to create drama, they hit a wall of silence. They threatened to go to the press? Silence. They threatened to sue me? Silence. They threatened to disown me? Silence. They were screaming into a void, and the void was looking at a calendar. The pressure in the house on Maple Drive was reaching a critical mass. Every time the wind blew, the tarp on the roof flapped, a constant reminder that they were not in control. Every time they huddled around the space heater, they were reminded that they had burned the bridge to the person who used to fix furnaces. Elaine and Mark were living in a house that was legally owned by a corporation that viewed them as a liability. They walked on the carpets knowing they hadn't paid for them. They looked at the walls knowing they didn't own the paint. The deadline was January 30th. I had a large wall calendar in my office. I had circled the date in red marker. January 30th. Payment due or eviction filed. It was the 28th. I sat at my desk late that night. The office was quiet. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway. I looked at the circle. For the first time, I asked myself what I would actually do. If the check didn't come, and I knew, mathematically, that the check was not coming because they didn't have the money, would I really do it? Would I really send the sheriff to the house where I learned to walk? Would I really watch my parents' furniture be put out on the curb in the snow? Would I really render them homeless? I closed my eyes. I thought about the night in the office when they told me not to come to Christmas. I thought about the years of being the second choice. I thought about the $450,000 that represented my freedom. If I saved them now, if I blinked, if I let the deadline pass without action, I would teach them that my boundaries were suggestions. I would teach them that they could abuse me, slander me, and rob me, and I would still catch them. I would be buying my own abuse. I opened my eyes. I was not saving them this time. I was saving myself. The red circle on the calendar did not look like a tragedy anymore. It looked like a finish line. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Sterling. It was late, but I knew he would answer. "Ms. Phelps?" he said. "Prepare the filings," I said. "For the eviction?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and for the sale. I want the listing agent ready to go on February 1st. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we file, it is public record. It is hard to walk back." "I am sure," I said. I hung up. I looked at the date. 2 days left. 2 days until the end of the world they had built, and the beginning of the one I was reclaiming. I felt a profound, quiet sadness, but no guilt. The guilt had burned away in the fire of their entitlement. All that was left was the ash, and I was finally ready to sweep it out the door. The drive to Pueblo that morning felt less like a homecoming and more like a funeral procession for a life I had already grieved. It was a Tuesday in late December, 3 days before Christmas. The sky was a flat, bruised gray, hanging low over the Colorado plains, threatening a snowstorm that the weatherman promised would be historic. I was not alone in the car. Following behind me in a sleek black sedan was Mr. Sterling. Beside him sat a locksmith he had retained. We were not a family coming to visit. We were an audit team arriving to close the books on a failed subsidiary. I pulled into the driveway of 1402 Maple Drive. I turned off the engine. The silence inside the cabin was absolute. I looked at the house. It looked exhausted. That was the only word for it. The beige siding I remembered from childhood was streaked with grime. The gutter over the porch had detached at one end, hanging like a broken limb. A large blue tarp was weighed down with bricks over the master bedroom, a crude bandage over the leak they had refused to fix properly because Logan needed the money for his image. A string of Christmas lights hung limply from the eaves. Half of the bulbs burned out, the other half flickering weakly in the morning gloom. It was a monument to deferred maintenance. It was a physical manifestation of the philosophy that had ruled this family for 30 years. Ignore the problem, spend the money on appearances, and pray someone else fixes it before the roof caves in. I stepped out of the car. The wind was biting, cutting through my wool coat. Mr. Sterling stepped out of his car, clutching a leather portfolio. The locksmith stood by the trunk, his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. The front door opened before we reached the steps. Elaine and Mark Phelps came out onto the porch. They were not wearing the expensive clothes they had worn to the dinner at the Golden Stag. They were wearing old fleeces and sweatpants. They looked smaller than I remembered. They looked like people who had spent the last month waiting for the executioner. Logan stood behind them in the doorway. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, his arms crossed tight over his chest, his face set in a mask of sullen defiance. He looked at Mr. Sterling, then at the locksmith, and finally at me. He did not look like a CEO. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting to see if he could talk his way out of it. "Veronica," Mom said. Her voice was thin, carried away by the wind. "You came." I stopped at the bottom of the steps. I did not walk up to hug them. I stood on the cracked concrete of the walkway. "I am here to inspect the property," I said, "and to conclude the tenancy." Mark rubbed his hands together. He looked at Mr. Sterling with fear. "Ronnie, listen," he said. "We just need a little more time, just through the holidays. It is Christmas. For God's sake, you cannot put us out before Christmas. Logan has a new lead, a real one this time. He is meeting with a developer in January. If that deal closes, we can pay the back rent. We can fix the roof." I looked at Logan. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at a dead bush in the yard. "There is no deal, Logan," I said softly. He snapped his head up. "You do not know that. You do not know what I'm working on. I know that no developer works with a man who has a credit score of 400 and a history of fraud." I said, "I know because I ran the background check." Logan flushed. "You are doing this out of spite," he spat. "You are doing this because you are miserable, and you want everyone else to be miserable too. Normal people do not do this to their families. Veronica, normal people help each other. Normal people do not steal $500,000 from their daughter and then ban her from Christmas dinner," I replied. I walked up the steps. Mr. Sterling followed. "Here is the situation," I said. I pulled a document from my bag. "I have two options for you today." I held up the paper. Option 1. This is a voluntary surrender of possession agreement. It is often called cash for keys. If you sign this today, you agree to vacate the property within 48 hours. You agree to leave the premises in broom-swept condition. In exchange, once the house is sold and the capital I invested is recovered, I will provide you with a one-time relocation assistance payment of $5,000 from the surplus proceeds. "$5,000?" Mom cried. "That is nothing. Where are we supposed to go?" "That is enough for a deposit and first month's rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in town." I said, "It is a restart. It is clean." I lowered the paper. Option 2. I continued. You refuse to sign. The locksmith changes the locks on the exterior doors immediately to secure the asset against further damage, as is my right under the emergency clause of the lease you violated. We proceed with the formal eviction lawsuit which is already filed with the court. It will go on your permanent record. You will be forcibly removed by the sheriff in 3 weeks, and you will receive $0 from the sale of the house. I looked at them. "Choose," I said. "It is not a choice," Logan shouted. "It is blackmail. Don't sign it. Dad, she is bluffing. She won't let the sheriff drag us out. She cares too much about what people think." I looked at my father. Mark Phelps had spent his entire life avoiding hard decisions. He had let his wife handle the bills. He had let his daughter handle the crises. He had let his son handle the dreams. He had drifted on a raft of passivity, assuming the current would always carry him to safety. But looking at me now, he saw something he had never seen before. He saw the wall. He saw the end of the line. He looked at the locksmith, who was checking his watch. He looked at the blue tarp flapping on the roof. He realized that the daughter who used to fix everything was gone. The woman standing in front of him was a creditor, and creditors do not bluff. "Give me the pen," Dad whispered. "Mark," Mom gasped. "No!" "It is over. Elaine," he said. His voice cracked. He looked at Logan. It is over. Son, there is no deal coming. There is no money. He took the clipboard from my hand. He did not read the terms. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name. It was a shaky, defeated scrawl. He handed the clipboard to Mom. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the house. She looked at the life she had built on a foundation of denial. Please, Ronnie, she sobbed. Sign it. Mom, I said, or lose the $5,000. She signed. Logan stood there, his hands clenched into fists. I am not signing that, he said. You do not have to. I said, you are not on the deed. You are not on the lease. You are an unauthorized occupant. Your signature is irrelevant. I took the clipboard back. I handed it to Mr. Sterling. Change the locks, I said to the locksmith. Wait, Dad said, our things. You have 48 hours to move your personal effects. I said, Mr. Sterling will supervise the move-out on Thursday. Anything left after that will be considered abandoned property and hauled away. I walked past them into the house. The air inside was stale. It smelled of dust and old cooking grease. I walked through the living room. I saw the worn carpet where I used to sit and organize their receipts when I was 8 years old. I saw the kitchen table where I had eaten generic cereal so Logan could play baseball. I walked down the hallway. The walls were still lined with Logan's trophies. Participation trophies, Little League trophies, a plaque for a business award that I knew he had paid an entry fee to receive. There were no pictures of my graduation. There were no framed copies of my CPA certification. There was no evidence that I had ever lived here, other than the roof that stayed up because I paid for it. I felt a ghost of the old sadness, the little girl inside me who just wanted her picture on the wall. But it was faint, like a radio signal from a distant station. I walked into the kitchen. I looked at the counter where I had signed the check for $450,000. I placed my hand on the laminate. It was cold. I am taking it back, I whispered. Not the house, the life. I turned around and walked out. I met Mr. Sterling on the porch. I handed him the spare key I had kept on my ring for 10 years. List it, I said. We will aim for a quick sale, he said. The market is decent. I want the proceeds distributed according to the waterfall structure we discussed. I said, first, repayment of the $450,000 principal to Blake Harbor LLC. Second, coverage of all legal fees and closing costs. Third, the $5,000 relocation payment to the tenants. And the remainder? Mr. Sterling asked. The remainder goes into my investment portfolio. I said, it is not a rescue fund. It is my severance package. I walked down the steps. My parents were standing by the locksmith's van. They looked lost. Logan was sitting on the hood of his truck, staring at his phone, probably already typing a story about how he was the victim of a corporate conspiracy. I reached my car. I opened the door. Ronnie? I turned. It was Mom. She had walked a few steps toward me. She looked old in the gray light. Her eyes were searching my face, looking for a crack, looking for the daughter who couldn't say no. Is this really it? She asked. Her voice was small, trembling. Are we just done? In your eyes, do we not matter anymore? Are we not important? I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had handed me a credit card bill when I was 15. I looked at the woman who had chosen her son's ego over my dignity at Christmas. You are important. I said, you will always be my parents. I will always hope that you are safe. I paused. But my life is important too. Mom, my future is important. My peace is important. And for 30 years, you made me feel like the only way I could matter to you was if I was paying for your mistakes. I cannot do that anymore. This is the only way we can look at each other and see the truth. I am not your bank, and you have to be your own adults. She did not answer. She just stood there, shivering in the wind. I got into the driver's seat. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I looked down. It was a picture message. It was from Jade. The photo was taken in my living room in Denver. The tree was lit up, glowing with white lights. Jade, Leo, Mr. Dawson, and 3 of my mentorship students were sitting on the floor, surrounded by decorations. They were holding up a piece of paper taped to the wall. On the paper, written in Leo's messy crayon handwriting, were the words, "Don't work too long. Your seat is waiting." I stared at the photo. The warmth of it seemed to radiate through the screen, thawing the ice in my chest. That was my table. That was my family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had chosen. The one that didn't ask for a credit check before letting me in. I smiled. It was not a triumphant smile. It was a quiet smile. It was the smile of someone who has finally put down a heavy load after carrying it for 3 decades. "Okay," I whispered to the empty car. "Noted." I put the car in gear. I did not look back at the house on Maple Drive. I did not look back at the parents who were finally facing the consequences of their own actions. I did not look back at the brother who was realizing that the world owed him nothing. I drove down the street, past the familiar landmarks of my childhood, past the school where I learned to count, past the bank where I learned to save. I turned onto the highway, heading north toward Denver, toward the mountains, toward the lights. I left the debt behind. I left the guilt behind. I drove into the cold, clean air of Colorado, knowing that the ledger was finally closed, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I truly hope it resonated with those of you who have ever felt like the backup plan in your own family. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Please let me know where you are tuning in from and share your own thoughts on Veronica's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and press that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.